Nihilism reached new heights yesterday when he signed a sweeping executive order aimed at overhauling American elections. The order targets many of Trump's grievances from the 2020 election, which he continues to falsely claim had widespread voter fraud, including requiring documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote and demanding that all ballots are received by Election Day. The order, which could disenfranchise millions of voters, claims the actions are designed to prevent non-citizens from voting. But as NBC News points out, quote, there is no evidence they do in significant numbers in the United States. Voting as a non-citizen is a serious crime that creates a paper trail that must be routinely reviewed by election officials. Trump's actions are sure to face swift legal challenges, given that the Constitution gives states the authority over elections. And the backlash from state election officials, it was immediate, with Arizona's Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, telling Democracy Docket, quote, I genuinely believe that the Trump administration wants to cancel the 2026 elections so that he and his party can stay in power. And we have to fight like hell against that by every means available. Joining our conversation, voting rights attorney and founder of the site Democracy Docket, Mark Elias. Mark Elias, do you agree with Adrian Fontes that 2026 is under attack?
Oh, I think there's no question that 2026 is under attack. I don't think Donald Trump's going to be able to cancel the elections, but I do think he wants to attack free and fair elections in every way he can. And I think it's going to be quite alarming and quite surprising to many people to see how far he's willing to go. This executive order itself is sort of a fever dream, right? He doesn't have the authority to do the things he claims to do, but he is going to try to bully and intimidate his way. But you are right, he is going to face lawsuits. I can promise him that, and he's going to lose those cases.
Let's talk about that promise, your first steps in the legal fights against this.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I have never been shy to say when I think Donald Trump or Republicans have crossed the line of the law. And when I say that we're going to sue, I mean we're going to sue. And so I expect, probably as early as next week, you will start to see lawsuits by various organizations, some of which may very well represent and others that we don't, to challenge this, because the president of the United States, as you point out, does not have a role in the constitutional system to regulate federal elections. Article 1, Section 4 says that the states do that, subject to legislation passed by Congress. Nowhere does it mention the president. On top of that, Congress has passed a series of laws, and it is the president's obligation to take care that they are faithfully executed, and that's his only role there. So a lot of this is bluster. A lot of this is what I call, in something I wrote for Democracy Docket earlier today, is performance art. He is sort of performing for his base. But it is very serious, Alicia, in that he is going to attack free and fair elections in 2026 in ways we have never seen done before. And we all need to be steeled for that reality, because the thing he fears most is that he will be held accountable at the ballot box.
Well, and to your point about performance art, he's got a bunch of backup singers in the House of Representatives. Republicans introducing a proof of citizenship bill. Election officials have warned it could disenfranchise many voters. I mean, they don't care, right? We've seen this playbook before. They tell us that there is fraud where there isn't fraud. They tell us to be suspicious of people of whom we do not need to be suspicious. To your point about the fact that this is a performance, yes, it could fundamentally change our election laws in this country. It also deputizes people to think that they are in charge of deciding who gets to vote and who does not.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that last point is something people can't take seriously enough. There is a reason why Donald Trump pardoned the January 6th insurrectionists. There is a reason why we had a big problem in 2024 with right-wing vigilante organizations trying to take it into their own hands, but through voter challenges and other suppressive means, to say who gets to vote and who doesn't. There is a reason why we saw in 2023 and 2024 Republican legislatures try to give greater discretion to election officials to decide which elections to certify and not certify. And so all of those things were just the warm-up for the, as you say, the choir singing behind Donald Trump of people who are willing to say, I don't want these people to be able to register. I don't want those people to be able to vote. And I will decide whose ballot counts and what election to certify. So this is a five-alarm fire. This executive order is a ham-handed way that the fire is being lit. But make no mistake, what you talk about this desire on their part to deputize their folks to decide whether you get to vote and whether your vote counts is a real problem. And I can promise everyone that it is one I take seriously, my team takes seriously, lots of others take seriously, and we will litigate aggressively.
Well, and then enter stage right, Elon Musk. The order gives DOJ access to state voter rolls. Why do you think they want DOJ to have access to those voter rolls?
Right. Look, I mean, really smart point. I mean, this is something I've pointed out also. You know, all of a sudden, in the middle of this executive order about state voter rolls and state voting laws, you wind up with a cameo of DOJ. By the way, and if you read further that sentence, you'll see he talks about them having subpoena power in some unspecified way. So query, why is it that DOJ needs to be inspecting state records? Why is it that DOJ would be subpoenaing records? I mean, after all, DOJ has nothing to do with elections, and Congress has not given DOJ subpoena power. So that is a particular provision that I am worried about because it does seem to meld together several strains of the authoritarian playbook that we have seen Donald Trump roll out. But I will tell Elon Musk, I will tell DOJ, I will tell the same thing that I have told Donald Trump. I am not scared of you. I am not afraid. We will not back down. We will litigate, and we will protect American democracy from all attacks. Well,
as you know, there's a little bit of the cheese standing alone right now because another one of Trump's orders was to go after another law firm, clearly a part of his strategy. There are folks like you who are standing in the breach. We need more of you. What do the rest of us do?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll be honest with you. It does feel lonely. I mean, I'm not alone. There are other lawyers who have been targeted. There are some law firms that are standing up, but there are lots and lots of law firms that are sitting down. There are lots and lots of big law firms, big corporate law firms with partners who are millionaires, multimillionaires, and who have revenues in the billions of dollars, these law firms. And rather than stepping forward and saying, we stand as a bulwark for democracy, these law firms have gone silent. They have, in some instances, actually settled and entered into agreements with Donald Trump. And so it is a dark time in the legal industry. The legal industry is not showing its best side. But there are lawyers who are. And it's not just me and my law firm. I issued a statement making clear we will never enter an agreement with Donald Trump. We will fight and fight and fight for American democracy, period. And there are other lawyers who are saying the same thing. What can people do? What people can do is they can stand up in their own town square. You know, not everyone is a news host like you who reaches hundreds of thousands and millions of people, but everyone can reach someone. They can reach people through their own social media. They can reach people through their town meetings, through town halls with their members of Congress. They can call members of Congress. They can talk about it at the dinner table, at the local diner, in their bridge club. And all of us need to be standing up right now for democracy. There are too many people who read the poem of the minister in Germany and said that would never happen here. There are too many people who sat in class and heard the words of Martin Luther King about the evils of the silence of the good people, and they said they would never be one of those people. Well, if you said you'd never be one of those people, now is time to not be one of those people. It is time